Hi everybody, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. This video is a continuation of my series on Raja Yoga. I'll be discussing the limb of Pratyahara, withdrawal from the senses, withdrawal from the mind. So at this point in your Raja Yoga practice, you will have established equanimity in the space that you inhabit through Yama and Niyama, being at peace with yourself as a person, and have relative balance in the environment in which you are doing the practice. You will be able to hold the posture of Asana. You will be able to regulate the calmness of your mind through Pranayama. And now, holding your Asana with your mind relatively calmed and your eyes closed, it is time to look inward and begin to gain control in a real way over the thoughts of your mind through the practice of Pratyahara. So, as I've already flagged, the term Pratyahara means withdrawal. That is to say, withdrawal from the senses, withdrawal from the mind. And what this really means is not so much gaining control over your thoughts, although that is in essence what you're doing in Pratyahara. Practically speaking, the process is much more passive. You're disengaging from thought, and you're, by disengaging, no longer allowing thought to control you. So why do we need to still the mind in order to progress to meditative practice, in order to gain control over ourselves? In this rationalistic society that we live in, the mind is put on a pedestal, and the mind has given us many great things in terms of our scientific achievements, in terms of great philosophical breakthroughs and the like. But the mind can also act as a fetter to our further development and to our ability to focus our perception and focus our awareness on what is important in life. And the mind can actually be quite a menace, and most of its thoughts are meaningless chatter that serve only to distract us and give us anxiety. And this is what is sometimes referred to as the monkey mind. If you observe what your internal mental state is like, you will see that your mind never stops talking. There is a constant internal monologue. There's a kind of commentary that is always turned on inside your head, and you can't watch the film of existence without this annoying commentary in the background. And once you start to really observe your internal state, you begin to notice it. And you begin to notice how it just doesn't ever stop. And if there's no problems for this internal speaker, this monkey mind to obsess over, it will create new problems, just so it has something to go over and over. And we think that we understand what it means to have peace. We think that it's possible for us to just sit down and relax and not do anything, and there we will have peace. But even when we sit down and relax, the mind doesn't stop pestering us. And so long as we don't gain control over this monkey mind, we won't have peace. There's a reason why most people can't stand to be by themselves. You think about what it means to be sitting by yourself somewhere, alone, not talking to anyone. In theory, it should be a very pleasant, peaceful experience. There's nobody bothering you, there's nothing that you need to do, you're just there in your own space. free to relax, free to just be. It should be a wonderful experience. But most people, when they're alone, find that they are tormented by themselves, tormented by their own thoughts, their own inner monologue, always breaking them down and criticizing them. And that's the mind. That's the monkey mind. And that is what we need to shut up in meditation, not only for our own peace of mind, not being constantly pestered by this mind that obsesses over things that don't really matter, but also in order to calm our consciousness so that we can see past the noise in our head, deeper down to see what we truly are. If you're like me, then you will love to go out on a clear night and look up at the night sky and look at all of the stars in the sky and the beauty and magnificence of the universe that we live in. The problem is, most of us live in a metropolitan area, in an urban or a suburban environment, and that means that at night there's lots of artificial lights that are left on, whether it's street lights or lights that are left on in large city blocks. And the effect of that, the cumulative effect of all of that artificial light, is that it creates light pollution, this phenomenon of light pollution. And so there's so much ambient light in the air that it dominates the sky and other more subtle lights, such as the more distant stars that are spangled throughout the night sky, are not visible. You might be able to, if you look up at the night sky in an urban or a suburban environment, you might be able to see a few very bright stars or planets, but the rest is pure blackness. And it's a real shame, because when you see the night sky in all its beauty, you see the full array of objects in the night sky. You see all of the myriad stars glittering in the sky like sparkling dust. And you can see the light of those distant stars, and you can appreciate the beauty of the heavens as you gaze up at them. And in the same way that we have light pollution in the atmosphere which prevents us from seeing the most distant and beautiful stars, we have pollution in our consciousness. We have pollution in our mind which prevents us from seeing more deeply into ourselves, those more subtle levels of ourselves, but the more fundamental and profound levels of ourselves. In this case, the pollution is the thoughts of the mind and the activity of the mind, and the brilliant distant star is our conscious awareness, the essence of what we truly are. And Pratyahara is all about getting rid of the mental pollution. So how do we begin to still the mind? Well, it's not easy. It doesn't come easily, because we don't know what it means not to think. We've thought our entire lives, almost without end. And so it's a very foreign way of being, to be without thought. And the other thing that makes withdrawing from the mind so hard is the way that the mind sucks us in. When you try and actually attempt to still the mind and have your awareness in control of what you experience, you begin to see how the mind is something separate from our awareness, and something which our awareness doesn't control, and something which is in many ways like a force of nature which dominates us until we learn to control it. We like to think that we are the origin of our own thoughts. We are not the origin of our thoughts. We are not in control. I live in Australia, and Australia is famous for its beaches. in the summer months, such as we're living in now, it's common for people to go down to the beach and swim in the ocean. The challenge is, and the danger is, that at some beaches there's a rip tide. There's a certain way that the tide of the ocean flows, which means that people can get swept up and carried away, away from the shore, in the opposite direction to where they're trying to get when they're swimming, and carried out to sea by this riptide. And unless you've had swimming lessons and you know how to swim against the tide in order to escape it, then no matter where you're trying to get in the ocean, the riptide will sweep you away from where you're trying to get and take you out to sea. And that's what thought is like. That is what the endless procession of thoughts is like. It's like a riptide. And if you don't develop the willpower to resist that, and you don't train your awareness to resist the tide of thought, it will carry you away. And we begin to develop that strength through Pratyahara. So the first thing to do in Pratyahara, the first way to begin the practice, to ease yourself into the practice, is something nice and easy. It's to simply let the mind run. Just let the mind run on and just observe the procession of thoughts that goes past. But do your best not to engage those thoughts, but you will find that it is very easy to become captivated by thoughts. But once you have allowed the mind to run, and you've really observed it for the first time, you begin to study the mind, you begin to really understand it and how it works, and that will put you in a better position to be able to exert some sort of influence over it later in the practice. And one thing that you will observe at first is that there's really two types of thought that go through your mind. There's certain thoughts which are external to you, that is to say, you hear a sound in the distance, or you feel a sensation on your skin, and that becomes a thought, and you're thinking about this external stimulus that you're responding to. And then the other type of thought is internal thought. This is the internal monologue that I was talking about before, where it's mainly just the mind going over things that have happened to you, or things that are going to happen, or things that you're feeling now, incessantly over and over again. And once we have observed the mind for a time, we can begin to try and exert control over it, or to rather reach a point where it's no longer controlling us. And when you're thinking about how to gain control of the mind, it's easy to think of a wrestling match with your mind, like Jacob with the angel, trying to exert your will and struggle with the mind to try and subdue it and best it in a wrestling match. But if you have that approach with the mind, if you try and force it to stop, then what you're doing there is you're just feeding the mind. You have to think of the mind as like quicksand. The more you struggle against it, the more you're making it easier for it to drag you in. Because anytime you oppose a thought and you don't want to think about a thought, you're agitating the mind by using the mind to try and subdue that. You're formulating a thought of, no, I don't want to think this. I'm going to stop this. I don't want this. And so you're adding thoughts to the existing thoughts. And that is a trap that you can fall into if you're not careful with Pratyahara. And so instead of screaming at your own mind to stop bothering you and only feeding its momentum, instead what you need to do with the mind is disengage from it. Refuse to engage with the thoughts as they arise. And this is a hard thing to do because the mind when it produces a thought, it's like it puts you under a spell. It's like the thought arises, and something about that thought fascinates you, and suddenly you have forgotten everything else that your attention was focused on before. And not only have you forgotten, you forgot that you forgot. So it's like you've entered into a dream, and you're not even conscious anymore. The thought has overcome you and deprived you of your consciousness. And we need to develop a discipline gradually in the practice of Pratyahara, where we learn to rouse ourselves from the enchantment of thought, in the same way that if we're feeling sleepy and we know that we need to stay awake, we can develop the ability to shake ourselves out of a state where we're falling into a slumber. We need to shake ourselves awake from thought, as it were, and stay focused and aware.